Good morning. We're back into the book of Daniel. We're going to start in chapter 2. So where are we at with these young men right now? We know they're about 18 years old. They've completed their training or teaching that the king wanted them to do. They've been able to eat what they requested and are healthier and better looking than the people that were eating the king's finest. So now the story is starting to begin of what's going to happen to these Daniel and his friends. So we're picking up in chapter 2 of the book of Daniel. We'll read the first 3 verses and then we'll chat a little bit and continue on. Does anybody have any questions or comments about chapter 1 at all that we've gone through? No? Chapter 2. Now in the second year of the reign of Nebuchadnezzar, Nebuchadnezzar had dreams, and his spirit was troubled, and his sleep left him. Then the king gave orders to call in the magicians, the conjurers, the sorcerers, and the Chaldeans to tell the king his dreams. So they came in and stood before the king. And the king said to them, I had a dream, and my spirit is anxious to understand the dream. It's probably not uncommon for somebody in a position of power to have dreams or visions and not understand what's going on. I mean, today, I'm sure we all have dreams throughout, and it was like, what on earth was that I just dreamed? You don't figure it out. But we don't have the resources or the advisors like they did back then to understand some of these things. We try to interpret them ourselves, but it's like we're just way out in left field of what some of these things are. But the king had some resources that he could call upon to interpret some of these dreams. But before we get into that, it starts off in the second year of his reign. Well, we already know that Daniel and his friends had completed 3 years of training. How could that be? If we're in the second year of the king's reign, but these men completed 3 years of training.
Maybe some time passed.
Some time passed?
In verse 21 of the first chapter, the last verse, it says, Daniel continued until the first year of Cyrus the king. So some time has gone by here.
Yes. But in chapter 2, it says, in the second year of the reign of Nebuchadnezzar.
Yeah, but that doesn't mean it was the second year of Daniel and the guys there.
Correct. A lot of the resources are saying when Nebuchadnezzar first took over was the middle toward late of the end of the calendar year of 605 BC. And back then, they didn't really count that as the first year of somebody's reign. It went to the next calendar year, and that became their first year of reign. So really, Daniel was captured, and he was getting training a little before what they were counting as the king's first year of the reign. So yes, Jerry, a little bit of time had passed in there. So the second year of Daniel's training was actually what they're counting the first year of the king's reign. Daniel's third year of training was what actually was considered the second year of the king's reign. So they didn't look at it as when the king first took power, they was more looking at it as a calendar year of how the reign was going on. So it fits in there. And really, it's not that important to the story. It really isn't. But a lot of people say, well, it says this second year here, but it says he had completed his 3 years of training here. There's some conflict. But there is some historians and people saying, here's where that comes into play, where it could be the 3 years for Daniel. And that's how they're saying it. It's because the first year was not really, that the king took over, was not counted as his first year of reign because it was a partial year. And we also note that the king had dreams. It's plural. Was it just one dream multiple times, or did he have multiple dreams? We don't know that. It doesn't say in Daniel here what he was having. Was he having a whole bunch of different dreams, or was he having the same one over and over and over? But it's multiple that he was having dreams, and now he can't sleep. He's having trouble. That could be understandable. Somebody that's recently into power, what these dreams are, he doesn't understand them, wants to know the interpretation of them, and he's having trouble sleeping. But Nebuchadnezzar's got other things going on in his little kingdom there and in his reign. Around 604 BC, he was sending his tax collectors, so to speak, out to the fringes edges of his kingdom to collect taxes, to collect money, to fund what he wants, to become more wealthy, to become more powerful. And in 604, Ashkelon resisted the Babylonian army. He fought up against them. So somebody that the king was collecting taxes from was standing up against him saying, no, you ain't going to collect my money. You ain't going to give you my taxes. But Nebuchadnezzar sent a larger army in, overcame these people, and for several months he had a large army sitting where Ashkelon had resisted him. So this could be playing on his mind too. I'm newly in power. I've got one people standing up against me, resisting me. I've squelched it, but is somebody else going to be coming to resist me as well? Do these dreams mean that? Do they have nothing to do with it? Is somebody else going to stand up and resist me? What am I going to do? So I can understand how that could be troubling him. And I can understand why he's losing sleep about this. Something important come up, in our lives. You dream about something, you lose some sleep. You got some big event coming up, you might lose some sleep over it. Nebuchadnezzar had a lot on his plate, and these dreams were very confusing to him. He didn't understand them, and it's very easy to see why he's losing sleep. So what does he do? Something we don't have. He calls in his advisors, people that he trusts, people that he has brought in, people that he respects, people that he listens to, and I'm sure he has called his advisors more than once. This isn't the first time. The Bible doesn't say it, but why would he have his advisors and not call him in for 1 or 2 years? They're going to advise him on various things that he has. What should I do in this situation where people resist me? What should I do with these people here? What should I do to collect more money? What should I do about these people who are not, worshiping gods that we have set up before? He's calling in his advisors. That's why he has them. So who did he call in? He called in magicians, conjurers, sorcerers, and Chaldeans. And they all have different, I don't want to say powers, they all have different specialties that they have. The magicians, they're people that could tell the future. Kind of makes sense why he'd call them in. I'm having these dreams. If it has to do about the future, these guys should be able to tell me. The conjurers, they're more like enchanters. With their magic spells, they could talk supposedly to the dead spirits, and their general task was to ward off the effects of threatening omens and spirits. That'd be somebody wise to bring in to interpret this dream. Somebody that, hey, if these are evil spirits wanting to do something to me, I want these people involved to tell me if that's one thing that these dreams are meaning. Sorcerers, kind of self-explanatory, people dealing with witchcraft. They supposedly channel supernatural powers from evil spirits to gain control over someone. Well, the king's dream is, am I going to conquer someone? Is somebody going to conquer me? I want my sorcerers there to be able to tell me this if it's part of it. And the last one was the Chaldeans, which are like astrologers. They related to the movement of the sun and stars and planets. They can predict a person's destiny. Being a king, that'd be kind of important. I'd like to know what's going to happen to me because I don't understand this dreams. So you got people predicting his destiny, people warding off evil spirits, people able to supposedly talk to dead spirits, and people that could tell me about the future. Not a bad group of people to interpret your dream, is it? So if you had a dream, wouldn't those be somebody you'd want to know? Makes sense to me. That's who he calls in. He calls in these people. But did you notice who he didn't call in? His wise young men, yeah. He didn't call in Daniel and his group. In chapter 1, these men were 10 times better than the people he had underneath him already. Bible doesn't explain why these men weren't called in. But these guys weren't called in on this particular situation. Did he truly not trust them? Don't know. Did he just want people that he had underneath him for a while? Don't know. It's not said. But I think it's interesting that it's noted that Daniel and them were 10 times better than the people he had underneath, these magicians, these sorcerers, but yet they were not called in to interpret this dream.
I think also he might not even have thought of the fact that these guys could interpret dreams.
That could very well be.
Good at a lot of stuff, but that had never come up yet.
Correct.
Probably just didn't even cross his mind that they'd be good at that.
That's a very valid point. And it's right at the ending of their training, and not thinking that, these guys can't interpret dreams. They're wise in other things that I want them to be. But how do you have a class on teaching to interpret dreams?
I would imagine he has specialists in all the different fields.
That's why he called in those groups. Yes.
He didn't make Daniels or those guys as specialists at all in that particular field.
At least, yeah. Well, that will change down the road. So that's a very valid point that, he just might not even thought of them because not thinking that they could interpret dreams whatsoever. So he brings his specialty people in, and in verse 3 he says, I had a dream. It's unsettling. I need your help to understand it. But at this point, he doesn't tell him the dream, which is interesting. A lot of times we read in the Bible, and other times, like back with Pharaoh and Joseph, Pharaoh told what the dream was and asked for the interpretation. Here, Nebuchadnezzar's not telling anybody what the dream is. I mean, that could be for a number of reasons. It could be he forgot the dream. It could be he's trying to test his people. I mean, we just don't know. Why isn't he telling them what the dream is? I mean, it's very interesting. He could very well have forgotten what the dream was. It's very well that he could just be testing his experts, that he might have some doubt about their expertise. And, how sharp are these people really? Continuing on with verse 4 through 7. Then the Chaldeans, this is one of the group that he had brought in, spoke to the king in Aramaic, O king, live forever. Tell the dream to your servants, and we will declare the interpretation. The king answered and said to the Chaldeans, the command from me is firm. If you do not make known to me the dream and its interpretation, you'll be torn limb from limb, and your houses will be made a rubbish heap. But if you declare the dream and its interpretation, you will receive from me gifts and a reward and great honor. Therefore, declare to me the dream and its interpretation. That's like the fourth time he said that, the dream and its interpretation. Verse 7, and they answered a second time and said, let the king tell the dream to his servants, and we will declare the interpretation. King's pretty adamant here. He wants to know what the dream is and what the interpretation is. Still don't know if the king forgot the dream or if he's just testing these people. So when the Chaldeans are there with them, the first group in verse 4, they greet him, O king, live forever. And the Chaldeans, they're the ones that can predict somebody's destiny. And so it's like they're saying, king, you're going to live forever. Like, not that they're schmoozing up to him, but that's just how they would greet the king any common day. King, live forever. Now you tell us your dream. So it's not like they're being sarcastic to him when they greet him that way. That's the type of greeting that the Chaldeans would do to the king or somebody in power. And by them saying it, king, live forever, it's what they believe is revealing about his destiny, that the king will live on forever. So this is not uncommon for them to greet the king in that manner. And then, as I said before, like in Genesis, the dreams have been told to the people to interpret it, but not in this case. Pharaoh did that to Joseph on his dreams, but Nebuchadnezzar's not informing them of what the dream is here. And he's very adamant that he wants to know what the dream is and what the interpretation is. And he's very strict about it, and then several times it's listed, he's saying, the command is firm. So he's not putting up with any backlash, any back talk. He wants to know what it is, because this is very, very troubling to him and what's going on right now. And he's like, you tell me my dream or else. And he's going on in verse 5 and verse 6. There's going to be consequences if you guys can't live up to what you say you can do. If you can't do why I've got you as my advisors, there's going to be consequences to you folks. And it's just not to them themselves. Because it says they're going to be torn limb for limb, which I interpret and see as that particular person is going to be killed. But then Nebuchadnezzar goes on, and your house to rubbish. What would that say to you? If you're one of his advisors and he says, if you can't tell me what this dream is and interpretation, I'm going to tear you from limb to limb, and your house is going to be made rubbish. Tells me my family's going to be killed too. So that's how serious Nebuchadnezzar is in interpretation of this dream. Run. Yeah, fast. So the severity of the punishment tells you how important or how much Nebuchadnezzar wants to understand what this dream means. It's critical to him to know what's going on. And he's basically pulling out all stops to figure out what it is. I mean, he just didn't bring his advisors and tell me what it is. Oh, you don't know what it is, I'll go ask somebody else. It's if you don't know what it is, you're going to lose your life. Your family's going to lose their life. And that's how serious Nebuchadnezzar wants to know what's going on. And the threats by Nebuchadnezzar we can see later on are not idle threats. Because we know what he tries to do later on in the chapter to the Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego by throwing them in the fiery furnace. He wants to kill them. We see other instances in 2 Kings where he killed King Zedekiah's sons before Zedekiah, then he poked his eyes out. We see where he also goes in Jeremiah, he burned to death 2 rebels, Zedekiah, not the king Zedekiah, and Ahab. So we know that Nebuchadnezzar is ruthless. We know that he won't stop at anything to get what he wants. So even though those events happened after this, we can see as readers of the Bible that he's serious. This is not an idle threat that he's talking to his advisors on, that I'm going to tear you from limb to limb, and your house is going to be made rubbish. Your family is going to die as well. So it's a very serious threat that he's brought onto these advisors. And it's just not 1 or 2 people. There's multiple people in there with him. There's multiple advisors that he has here under different categories. So it's not like there's 3 or 4 people. There's probably well over a dozen people that he's trying to get these dreams interpreted from, and they're just not able to do it. And they're still making excuses of, King, tell us the dream. Let us know what it is. So after the king made his threats of, if you can't tell me what it is, he goes on to in verse 6, but if you can, there's going to be great reward and great honor. So for somebody doing what they're supposed to be doing, there's going to be a great reward and great honor for them. And that's pretty interesting. To me, great reward, and through the commentators as well, they're saying great reward is more like a material thing. There might be money, there might be a promotion or something, but great honor is something completely different. That's more like a political thing, more of an ego builder for the people that can interpret his dream. So there can be a material gift, a material reward for them, but there also can be a political heightening in their career if they can interpret this dream. The way it's stated that there's a great gift and reward, but also a great honor. So the king's laid out, there's risk and reward, and he lays out what they could do, what would happen if they do interpret, if they tell the dream and interpret the dream. And in verse 7, for the second time, he says, they say, tell us the dream and we will interpret it. Going back to verse 6, which his advisors are repeating again. Tell us what the dream is and we will interpret it. Why do you think they keep asking Nebuchadnezzar to tell them what the dream is? They don't have a clue. That's it. They are clueless in this aspect. As smart as these men may be, as much unnatural power that they may have that we can't understand, if they can call spirits or anything like that, that we might not understand, they have no clue what this dream is, let alone trying to interpret it. They're at a loss. And it's probably something fairly new for them to be at a loss under such great pressure right now as the king's putting them under. And that's very interesting that this is happening to them, and it's probably an unfamiliar territory that they're in, that they don't know what to do at this point. Imagine yourself being in their situation. You were an advisor to a king, everything was good, now your feet are literally put to the fire to tell him something you know nothing about and then interpret something you know nothing about. It's going to be very distressing for these folks that are his advisors at this point. Any comments before we go on? Tom?
I was just saying, it seems obviously, we know Nebuchadnezzar's sort of mental, whatever. We read the rest of the book, but it seems kind of short-sighted, like you said. Most of these people probably have given him advice before.
Exactly. I mean, that's an interesting point, because if he would have wiped them all out, what would he have done? Who would he had to advise him after that? Dream still unknown, dream still not interpreted, nobody to advise him on things. So it's very interesting that, he would do such a knee-jerk reaction. So that tells you how troubling it was to him.
Back in verse 9, he says, he didn't tell him the dream because he was afraid to make up a lie.
That, so,
The other thing is, it's all of God. God probably put in his heart to do it this way to promote Daniel.
yes. Wait.
That's the greater picture. That's probably what
The-
happened.
That's the big picture. And that's what we want to focus on, that God has his hand in this all the way through of what's going on here. Terry, then Bob.
I think he had a whole empire to choose from to people get to give counseling to him. This is not a guy who is restrained by anybody. There's no judiciary that can stop him. There's no Congress that can stop him. He has all the authority in one person. If he says they're dead, they're dead. And he can do anything he wants and get away with it. There's nobody to stop him.
Absolutely. And if he,
It's not a great way to have a government, but that's the way it was back then.
and if he says they're dead and then he wipes them out, he'll get more, just like he pulled in Daniel and his friends when he overtakes another nation. He pulls in their best and brightest and wisest and teaches them and trains them up to help become his advisors. Bob.
I was just gonna say, sometimes you make a quick decision and sometimes it's hard to walk afterwards. If the people that took their lives, then he would have been, like you say, left out, so he made the decision what was wrong.
At that point, that's tailfeather on what Tom said. Absolutely. Do a knee-jerk reaction, wipe everybody out. Then what does he do? Ted.
To piggyback over on what Ted said, if you think back to Jonah, Jonah's in a boat with a bunch of atheists who are praying to their own gods, and they aren't, it isn't doing any good, so they keep on rowing, and Jonah says, throw me overboard because I offended my own God. And then finally, when they did, they realized that Jonah's God was the God that actually created the sea. And I think it says they even prayed to him. God uses those kinds of situations to convert men and to make points. And he's doing the same thing here, just like Ted says, because if his own people that believed in the gods of the Babylonians can't do it, and then the Jewish young men, their God can, he's going to change his mind, which we find that he does at a certain point.
Right, we find that out. It is implied and referred to that down in verses 10 and 11, absolutely. I mean, and earlier when I was doing chapter 1, I referred back to that it stated that God is using his servant Nebuchadnezzar. It wasn't here in Daniel, but, other places. So Nebuchadnezzar is being used by God in this situation, and God has got his control of what's going on, as both Teds over there are saying. Anything else before we move on? Any comments? Great conversation here. Continuing on to verse 8. We'll go 8 through 11. And the king answered, now remember, he's responding to these guys saying, tell us what the dream is and we'll interpret it. And the king answered, said, I know for certain that you're bargaining for time, inasmuch you have seen that the command from me is firm. That if you do not make the dream known to me, there is only one decree for you. For you have agreed together to speak lying and corrupt words before me until the situation is changed. Therefore, tell me the dream, that I may know that you can declare to me its interpretation. The Chaldeans answered and said, King, there is not a man on earth who could declare the matter for the king, inasmuch as no great king or ruler has ever asked anything like this of any magician, conjurer, or Chaldean. Moreover, the thing which the king demands is difficult, and there is no one else who declare it to the king except God's, whose dwelling place is not with mortal flesh. The king's asking again, and these guys still don't have an answer. I mean, how many times can you be asked the same question and give the same answer until somebody's going to get frustrated? Somebody's really going to get upset.
Well,
Joe.
why didn't they just make up something and
Roll, yeah, that's what it is. I mean, but
Because they knew the king knew what the dream was.
I mean,
That's why.
they assumed he knew what it was. I assume that he does.
He's saying if they're gonna die anyway,
Yeah.
they won't try.
I mean, you got a shot at it, but I mean, it'd be different if it was choice A or B. But tell me what the dream is, man. That could. You dreamed about rowing a boat. I don't know. I mean, that's a hard one to do, but it's. These guys are fighting for their lives right now. Bill.
Isn't it interesting, though, that they told the truth?
Yes.
This doesn't reside in humans, only gods can do that. So it's,
Yes.
it's a foreshadow of, like, if they can do it, the gods can.
Yes.
I mean, they're wise enough to speak the truth anyway.
That's-
Even though they may not have known they were speaking the truth, but it foreshadows what's to come.
I always heard the phrase, when in doubt, tell the truth. I mean, that's the case for these folks right here. I mean, there is nothing left. They have no other choice to tell the truth. Because the king is saying, I know you're lying. I know you're trying to bargain for time. You guys all agreed to lie to me. So it's like, he knows. He knows they don't know. Is he just trying to get them to admit, I don't know? But that's what basically came. They says, no one on earth can declare this matter to the king. In verses 10 and 11, one of the commentators says, they declared a fourfold defense in answering the king. And the first one was, no man on earth could declare the matter for the king, which we found out to be true. Their second answer is, no great king or ruler would ever ask anything like this to anybody. So now they're kind of saying, you're being unfair to me. You're asking something that no good king, no great king would ever ask anybody. Kind of poking the bear there, which, well, if you're going to die anyhow, you might as well go out with a bang, but that's what they're doing. The next one, the king's demands are difficult. Well, that's why you guys are there. You're his advisors to handle difficult things. But again, they're poking the bear. They're saying, King, what you're asking is really, really hard. Then the very last one, which Bill and Ted pointed out to, no one can declare the answer of the king except God's who is not with mortal flesh. There's the answer. Nobody, no thing, no God on earth can answer this question. So verse 10 is inferring that all the glory to answering of what the dream is and its interpretation is to the one and only true God. He's the only one that can reveal what the dream is and its interpretation of what it is. Their own answer is saying that. It's stating it point blank. No God on earth, mortal flesh, can answer what this is. Now we know what the true answer is. So does this make Nebuchadnezzar feel happy about his answer? Hey, these guys that have been answering me for years are now lying to me because their gods that they're dealing with are gods I've been worshiping, can't answer my question. Kind of lets a little air out of everybody's bubble there. Not only the king's, but all his advisors there. Not a good place to be in if you're one of his advisors right now. Any comments on that about what's happening here with the answers that his advisors gave to? Verse 11, yes.
Okay, I got it. It says that they can't, the God there is small and cheap.
And it's plural.
And it's plural.
Right.
It's like the gods that Nebuchadnezzar worshiped, the god of the sun, the moon, and everything else down there. Not the one true God that we worship. That's what they're referring back to there. None of these gods here can answer that question. They cannot interpret what the dream is. They don't even know what the dream is in verse 11.
And by the way, back when you read verse 2, where I think that your translation says magicians,
Yes.
the actual words there are soothsaying priests. Now, soothsaying is where the priest says that he can talk to his God and get an answer. These guys can't, and they're saying they can't, because they're saying they are not gods. See, they said that they had access to their gods, but their gods aren't telling them anything. And that's
The
what they're
magician.
saying in verse 11. The gods have to tell you. Now, their gods aren't real.
Right.
We know their gods aren't real. But they're saying the God's got to tell us. But the point is, and why he gets angry is, Well, your gods aren't telling you. And you're the ones who say that you can get knowledge from your
From
God.
your-
But you're not getting knowledge from your God about this thing.
So he's not only mad at his advisors, he's mad at their gods as well. Because the gods aren't answering the magicians, whoever's request to get what this information is. The communication is not there.
This was true all the way through ancient history, where even in Delphi, I forget what they call it, the oracle of Delphi, who was a young woman that supposedly conjured up the spirits from underneath. When someone went in to ask a question, they had to state it in a certain way, and a certain way gave clues as to what it was that they really needed to know, or they couldn't give an answer. Now, they didn't say it that way, like, if you don't give me this information, I can't, but it was understood that you kind of have to tip me off, you know? Kind of like a palm reader or whatever, same sort of thing.
So give an answer that's kind of giving tips of, I know what you're talking about.
Give a question that tips off so I can give you the right answer.
Well, these guys weren't getting that.
No,
No, not from Nebuchadnezzar.
they knew that they had to have that or they couldn't give an answer.
Absolutely. And it's not looking good for them. So it's interesting that these advisors are having to have these clues and tips to get some form of answer. But we're going to see later on that Daniel doesn't need any clues or tips from any other thing other than just praying to God to find out what's going to happen. Anything else before we move on? Verses 12 and 13. Because of this, the king became indignant and very furious, and gave orders to destroy all the wise men of Babylon. So the decree went forth that the wise men should be slain, and they looked for Daniel and his friends to kill him. King is mighty upset because he's not getting the answers that he wants. I'm sure he is not being used to being told no. I mean, how many little kids are told no and don't accept it? Nah, they don't go for it. But when you're in a power like a king and you're told no, off with their heads, and that's what he's doing here. And everybody's saying the king's being unreasonable, but the king wants his answers, and his advisors aren't getting his answers. He's annoyed, he's upset, so he's declaring, let's kill all the wise men. Bill?
Yeah, all of them.
All.
Not just the ones that had the chance to say something, he's done the whole thing.
He's going to start fresh. He's going to start with a new group, is what it looks like here. Plus, it also states in verse 13, and they looked for Daniel and his friends. These guys weren't even there. They didn't even have the opportunity to interpret it. But they were trained up to be his advisors. So, I mean, you're in this group, you're out. And that's what's going to happen here, as Bill's saying. He's getting rid of all of these men. And so they started looking for Daniel and his friends, even though they weren't given the opportunity to discuss or hear that the king had a dream, and he wants to know what the dream is and know about it. Daniel and his friends didn't even know what was going on at this point. We'll see that as we continue on verse 14. 14 through 16. Then Daniel replied with discretion and discernment to Arioch, the captain of the king's bodyguard. So apparently Daniel's been found, who had gone forth to slay the wise men of Babylon. And he answered and said to Arioch, the king's commander, "For what reason is the decree from the king so urgent?" Then Arioch informed Daniel about the matter. So Daniel went and requested of the king that he would give him time in order that he might declare the interpretation to the king. So it's not just like that they're out there with their swords drawn and say, "You're a wise man, off with your head." Don't know if they were grouping them together or what. But this guy, Arioch, that was captain of the king's bodyguard, and I found that the Aramaic interpretation of the word bodyguard here is executioner. So this is the captain of the executioner that is carrying out this command to kill all the wise men. So if it was when kill on sight, they would have got Daniel right then and there. But for whatever reason, Daniel was given the opportunity to speak and kind of plead his case a little bit. And he spoke to this captain of the guard. And remember, as Daniel had to do before about the food, he had to use discretion, the right words, not to tick anybody off. You got to say the right words because, number one, this guy's here to kill you anyhow. Number two, you don't want to make him any madder at you. And you really got to plead your case why you should have some time on this and why you should go talk to the king and say, I can help you here. And with God intervening here, Daniel was given that opportunity. But Daniel also asked, why is this so urgent? And it's also being translated, why is it so severe? And he's talking about killing of everybody. Because Daniel, like I said, he had no clue what was going on. He had no idea why they're out there to kill these wise men, why he's out there to get Daniel and his friends. So this guy, Arioch, brings Daniel up to speed. King had a dream. You want to know what it was? Nobody could tell him. The wise men couldn't tell him. King's mad. You're dead. End of story. So he's up to speed. He's able to have some time and plead his case. And it's interesting, in verse, I believe it's 16, Daniel went in and requested of the king. So Daniel himself was able to have a presence with Nebuchadnezzar and request time and say, give me some time and let me see if I can help you out here. So it's not just like he sent the king's executioner back to, hey, tell him I can do it. He got him, the executioner, to allow Daniel to be in front of the king and make the plea himself, as we see there in verse 16. So Daniel had an audience with the king. And again, you got to phrase your words properly when you're doing this. Daniel, I don't think, was necessarily over-concerned with his life because he knew what his faith was. But he's trying to help the king out here. And he knows his friends' lives are at stake and other people, countrymen, their lives are at stake, all these wise men. But he's trying to do the right thing here, Daniel is. And for Daniel's sake and everybody else, the king says, sure, I'll grant your request. Don't know how long it was. Don't know if he gave him 24 hours, 12 hours, 10 hours, 4 days. But we do know, as we read on, Daniel was able to sleep. So it was at least overnight. And Daniel, we got to remember, is 10 times better than all the other guys. Now, did the king calm down a little bit? Is it because Daniel come in? Daniel's not one of the guys that the king initially called into. A few hours gone by and the king's saying, you know, maybe I really shouldn't have said I'm going to kill everybody. I'm going to give this guy a chance. Did he calm down a little bit and starting to realize that, let me think about this again? We don't know everything that's going on there. We don't know if this is a matter of hours or days that all this is happening. But the king is letting Daniel take some time and come back to him and answer the situation. Bill.
I think the way Daniel approached him, though, wasn't that, it's not like, well, tell me what your dream was, he said, just give me some time and I'll work on it. So, I mean, in some ways, by saying that, he gave the king some hope. The other guy said, tell us, otherwise we can't do it. Daniel's saying, give me some time, let me think about it, let me see what I can do. And I think in some ways, the way that he approached him gave Nebuchadnezzar a little bit of hope to say, well, what's a little bit of time,
Exactly. What's another day? If you're wrong, you're dead. It could very well be. Jason.
Like I said, he didn't say give me some time. He said, you tell me when you want me to come tell you. He gave all the power to the king.
Yeah.
You tell me and I'll provide the answer. So he didn't just, he was asking for some time, right? But
Right.
he did it, like you said, he did it in a way that was all in respect to the king. So when you want the answer, I'll come to you.
Every time Daniel approached somebody, whether it was the king or somebody under the king's control, he was very tactful in the questions and how he approached it. And it was very smart of Daniel to do it that way. Whether it was for the food or whatever it was for here, when do you want me to come back to you? He was very tactful and wise in how he approached his questioning, which tells you how smart of a young man Daniel was. 18 years old, my head would have been chopped off a long time ago. I'm sorry. I just didn't know when to keep my mouth shut. But Daniel and his friends were wise, smart, trained properly, and they knew how to approach people and things in certain situations. And this is one instance, as Jason said, he did it very tactfully, and he did it in the right way, which allowed him to be able to come back at a different point. Bob?
We, wish we had, the knowledge that Christ had when he was here, talking with people when he was in the flesh. If he had that knowledge, we wouldn't have the same thing, so Daniel's got the same thing that he's got, and he knows how to approach people. And sometimes, I feel like I don't have the knowledge to do that.
It takes knowledge and tact to approach people in a certain way so you don't offend or upset them. And especially nowadays, I mean, people get offended at the slightest thing. And, but as you both back there saying, he did it in a way that was very tactful and proper, and was able to get the result that Daniel was looking for, which was get a little more time. And Daniel knew what he was going to do other than, well, no, let's come up with some form of plan here, guys. Daniel, as we're going to be reading on, we'll probably catch this next week, of what he's going to do. But Daniel had a plan, but Daniel approached it properly to begin with, so he could take time to do what he needed to do. Any other questions or comment before we go for the day? Thanks for being here. We'll pick up next week, hopefully.